Welcome to Everywhere is a Bigger Pie, Cultivating Abundance in a Time of Scarcity. My name is Carlton Turner, and I have the great honor of speaking today with Natalie Baszile. She's the author of Queen Sugar, the novel that went on to inspire the hit TV series that ran for 7 seasons. In her latest book, We Are Each Other's Harvest, celebrating African American farmers, land, and legacy, is this beautiful and powerful collection that shines a light on Black farmers and the deep connection between land, history, and community. Through both her storytelling and her research, Natalie really helps us to see how these narratives shape who we are. Natalie, welcome. I'm really excited and honored to be in this conversation with you.
Oh, Carlton, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So Natalie, you've given us Queen Sugar, which became this beloved series about farming, family lineage, and land. And then We Are Each Other's Harvest, which uplifts the voices of Black farmers and their communities. When you look at these two projects side by side, what do you see as the thread that connects your storytelling? What
Mm.
first drew you to these stories?
When I used to think about the story of who the American farmer was, right? I grew up in the days of Farm Aid and those Willie Nelson concerts and um, television shows about farmers, and I always felt like lots of people that, farming is part of the American narrative. It's the way we think about ourselves, it's the way we think about our history, the connection that we have to the land. And yet when I would reflect back on the people who were portrayed in those stories, I never saw black and brown faces. And I knew that black people had had a very long history, where we were connected to the soil. And so, as I was thinking about the kind of story that I wanted to write, and I was thinking about the way, people appreciate and really have such reverence for farmers in this country, I wanted to have stories, first in fiction and then in nonfiction, that widened the lens and that really told a more inclusive story about who built this country and and the history that black people had with land.
I know your roots go back to Alabama,
Mhm.
and I am eighth generation Mississippian. My family's been. I live in the same community that my family has been in for 8 generations, and that all those generations have been connected to the land, from being farmers, to my sister has a PhD in agriculture.
Wow.
So our connection to the land has been long. So thinking about, in your new work, We Are Each Other's Harvest, you talk a lot about these really powerful stories about families working across generations, all across the country. I'd love to hear you reflect a little bit on what you noticed when those intergenerational relationships were really strong, and also what you see or what you saw when those intergenerational relationships were not there.
Mhm.
How do you think those connections really help us get to this idea of pushing back against this scarcity framework?
Mhm. Mhm. So, I'll start by saying you're absolutely right about the intergenerational relationships. So many black families I know of have a story of land and land ownership in their families, right? And that lineage it's so interwoven into the experience of so many families. And yet people would also say to me, the younger generations, they would say, I don't know what to do with this land, or my family has sold the land that we have. And so that was alarming to me because I, like so many other people, understood what land meant. And so part of what I'm trying to do in my work is to really celebrate and amplify and elevate the stories and the people who recognize what land ownership and land stewardship has meant through the generations, while we have this narrative about land ownership, we have a competing narrative in our community about getting off the land, right? Getting as far away from the land as you can get because of this complicated history. So often in Black and brown families, working with the land has a stigma attached,
For sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because that's like labor, that's hard labor. Success often means getting as far away from the land as possible and going to get an office job or, going on to get, advanced degrees. And all of that is fine. But I think what I was really trying to do in this book was celebrate the people who recognize land ownership and land stewardship as an equally valuable experience and as an equally important definition of success. And throughout this book, that is the common thread that links all of these stories together.
Yeah, being from Mississippi, and something that most people don't understand is that Mississippi has the highest concentration of Black landowners in the country. And a lot of that has been diluted and m- disfigured because of the Great Migration, and much of that was very much entrenched in what you're talking about in terms of this very complicated relationship with the land. For me, I wrote this piece about my mother. My mother would always tell me the story about um, the first time she went to start chopping cotton, at 5 years old, and how her mother didn't want her to go. But her grandfather was like, let that baby go to the field if she want to go to the field. And so for years she would tell me the story, and I would get really upset when she would tell it to me, because in my mind, she was going to chop cotton for the white folks.
Mhm.
So I said, well, Mom, I said, whose land who were y'all farming for? She said, what are you talking about? I said, well, whose land was who were you working for? You chopping cotton? She said, it was our land. We were growing the
Yeah.
cotton. We were, it was, and it completely flipped the way that I understood my family's relationship to the land that we lived on and around, and what it meant to be landowners and to be stewards of land. And so we think about this in terms of like what you're talking about, these multiple generations of land ownership. Many people run away from the land because they don't see it as successful. But there's
Exactly.
a relationship around land and power that we have not fully explored, and what that means in terms of the great migration of people
Mhm.
leaving places in the South, and how we ceded a lot of that power. So I really am really interested in more of this idea about identity. How do we identify power? The land itself is becomes a character in your work, right? It's
Mhm.
not just a subtext. It's not just a background. It is defining a principal character. So
Yes.
I'd love to hear you talk about your relationship, how these relationships with land shape our personal identities, and specifically how these families that you were talking about generationally, and also our communities, how we understand land as community practice.
Mhm. Mhm. What has emerged into the kind of cultural conversation is a conversation about intergenerational wealth, right? And people weren't talking about that 20 years ago, right? I mean, we knew it, but we did not necessarily have language to define it. And when you start and so one of the statistics that I have on a page in my book, I won't be able to find it now, is a statistic that I found. It was a study that was done in like 2017. And it talked about how in Black families, the average wealth by like 2030 was going to decrease down to zero, right? And when I came across that, I was alarmed because what it told me was that Black and brown communities did not understand, and I don't mean to be prescriptive here. That's not what this is about. This is kind of a broad stroke. But what it told me is that we had to reframe the way we thought about land ownership because we were missing this huge opportunity, right? Something that had been in our families. Land has been in Black families for generations, and yet we did not recognize that as a source of wealth. Not only as a source of wealth that you could pass down to your families, but just like the way you told the story about your own, family, recognizing that they weren't chopping cotton for somebody else. They were chopping cotton for themselves on land that they owned. And so what I have tried to explore is this idea that land is power, right? Literally power. It is agency, it is self-determination, it is food sovereignty, right? Because you can grow your own food and you know where it comes from and you can control the harvest and all the rest. So land is not just a metaphor, right? For wealth and power and success. I'm talking it can be a literal source of freedom and independence. And this is again what I'm always trying to say in my work, and I'm trying to remind people, look what we have. This isn't something that we have to run out and get and acquire. In many cases, this is something that we have. We just have to reframe the way we are thinking about this asset that is already in so many, Black and brown families.
Yeah, and I think I want to complicate that a little bit because I think building on that story that I was sharing, the second story that my mother would tell me is about the day that she remembers her father, who was my grandfather, basically saying that he had to give up farming. They were able to keep us out of the market and getting fair wages and fair prices for our goods, which even if you own the land and was able to produce the goods, you weren't going to get your due for them. So, and the story that she would tell is my grandfather coming back from taking all the cotton to market and had all these dreams for what he was going to do with the money, and came back and was like, I can't do this anymore because they didn't give me what I deserve and what the fair market price was for my goods. So I think part of the great migration is both a story about, people looking for a different type of life, but it was also a story about white supremacy and being chased from the place in which you can have that freedom and power, and the recognizing of the systems of capital, that in order to control the market, you have to control the land, you have to control the prices. And I think for us, it's not that our my grandparents didn't know that, is that they could not unlock that system in ways that will be mutually beneficial and that could translate generationally. And so, thinking about, you're talking about scarcity. There's scarcity is real. It's not an imagined thing.
Yeah.
But whether it's land or money or even opportunity, in a time when right now things feel like they're being ripped away and pulled away at an even greater level,
Yeah.
how do we keep leaning into this idea of abundance? How does that fit into the framework for what you are exploring? Because I know that's what you found in a lot of these stories is abundance.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And what I'm encouraged by is to see how new generations of farmers, Black farmers, new generations of land stewards are kind of breaking down those walls, right? I'm thinking, for example, I saw a young guy on he came up in my Instagram feed 2 weeks ago, right? And he is a young guy who is he has like a shirt company, like a t-shirt manufacturer. He is controlling the whole cycle.
The 100% cotton shirts. Yes.
Yes. Yes. And that is encouraging to me because what I'm seeing in the new generation of entrepreneurs are people who recognize the value, they have the education, They have the financial sophistication,
Yes.
and so that to me is an example of how we can approach the challenges that we're facing with an abundance mindset, right? It's looking around in our community, it is getting investment from our community, but also leveraging our experience and our talent in these ways that are entrepreneurial. Then people aren't waiting for permission. That is just one example of that I find very encouraging.
Absolutely, absolutely. The work that we do here in Utica, where my family has been for 8 generations, we run an artist residency. The
Oh,
organization that my wife and I founded is called the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production, and we run an artist residency where we support artists, doing their work. We run a community farm where we produce food. We have a commercial greenhouse, and we have a cultural center with a 1,700 square foot commercial kitchen. So we're
wow.
we're growing food, we're creating compost, you know we're distributing food. It's all about supply chain and understanding how we can be involved in more of those practices that are essential to any community's development and sustainability. And when we talk about scarcity, money is usually the first thing that comes to people's mind, like, I need more money. But there's other things that I think we don't think about that are lost. And I'd love to hear you, just talk about what other types of scarcity should we be paying attention to try to counteract. I'll say for me, as a person who has a background in the arts, for me, what I've seen in my community is a loss of imagination as a critical function of us being able to think about what we really want our communities to be. And so we're trying to create an abundance mindset around imagination using storytelling.
I love what you said about encouraging people to use their imaginations, right? That is so important. I feel like as encouraged as I am to see the focus over the years on STEM, right? And no shade, right? We need scientists, we need computer scientists, we need, mathematicians, absolutely. But what has been distressing to me is the it's what's been distressing to me is the emphasis on that to the exclusion of everything else. Because we need to be creative. We need to be critical thinkers, right? And when I think about even the generations who are going to college and who are foregoing, majors, and again, I understand why. So I don't want to sit here and be totally Pollyanna about this. I understand the pressure that young people feel to get out, get a job, get their career started and all that. But we're not robots, right? We are human beings. And part of the joy of living is to engage in creativity, right? To be a critical thinker, right? And so what I'm encouraged by the work that you're doing founding an artist residency because that to my mind is just as important as being a computer scientist, right? I'm not saying that you have to have a career in the arts, but I think that even having access to all the facets of how we think, how we engage with the world, our imaginations, that's where the ideas come from, you know? So, all to say, I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you. This has been a really wonderful conversation. I want to end on a really positive space, and I want to know from you. There's so much going on in the world. I mean, we could talk ad nauseum about all the problems and challenges. But what is giving you hope right now? What are the things that are feeding you and putting a smile on your face and lightening your spirit in this moment? And what would you like people to carry forward from these conversations into their own lives and communities?
Well, I think we can't lose hope, right? And I mean that again, not in a naive way, because the world is complicated
Yeah.
and it is more challenging and it is deeply distressing to me to see how so much progress is being dismantled, right? But when I look around on at my community, when I look around at the uh what young people are doing, when I look at how people are really kind of coming together, right? That is what brings me hope. Sometimes, Carlton, all I can do is like go and find beauty in nature, right? Sometimes that's the most I can do, but that is uplifting because I see the power of um yeah, just like the human spirit, you know? I mean, I can look at any number of examples around the world where people are still fighting for what is right, right? Communities are still coming together. I feel like the human spirit is, um, I don't even know what the word would be, unsuppressible. I'm just going to make up a word. Yeah. You know, I see the joy that people take in coming together, right? For small celebrations. That's the thing that gives me hope and that brings me joy, and like you said, puts a smile on my face. When I encounter a beautiful painting or a portrait or some artistic expression, that is the thing that renews my spirit, and that's the thing that I continue to turn to, you know, to balance out all of the difficulty and to remind myself that, a mindset of abundance is a real thing, and that is the thing that will get us through. I think when if we hold on too tightly and we only focus on what is negative, our spirits are shrinking, and we need our spirits to be boundless. We need to feel joy. We need to see possibility. So, I'm just trying to do my creative work, and, I know that you're trying to encourage that too, and I guess at the end of the day, that's what makes me hopeful.
Well, Natalie, it's a pleasure to meet you and an honor to have this conversation with you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing and uplifting these stories. And if you're ever around Mississippi, come see us down here in Utica. We'd love to host you and feed you and sit on the porch and talk a while.
Amazing. Thank you. I'll take you up on that offer.
All right.